Ahoy! Joe Buddy Hambone here, and I'm back again with a brand new coupon code from our friends over at Noble Night Games. This time we got a long one for you. It's Ring of Warmth, and it's good from now all the way through February the 28th, and it will get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games. That's right, the code's going to last a long time, and it's a long code as well. It's Ring of Warmth to get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Noble Night Games running through February the 28th. It's a perfect time to get more games after the holiday season, and if you haven't yet, why not check out Noble Knight's trade-in program? I just did it myself. It was super easy, and now I have room on my shelves to put more games. And when I buy those games, I want to buy them from Noble Night Games. I'm going to use the code Ring of Warmth, and it's running now through February 28th from our friends over at Noble Night Games.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He said, "Yo, Hambone, you want to talk about some monsters?" And I was all like, "Yeah." Stu Horvath.
Hi, Hambone.
How's it going, man?
Pretty good. How are you?
You know, I can't complain. We are rounding out the year, finishing up our episodes for 2021, hoping that 2022 will be a little better than this one was. So
Yeah, here's hoping.
we are going to cruise into the new year with some real over-the-plate topics for us, things that we really like to talk about. So today we're going to talk about the Monstrous Compendium.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, I have all these weird associations with Christmas because I remember a lot of things that I got for Christmas. I associate those things with Christmas, even though there's no real connection between like the Monstrous Compendium and the festive time of year. So the other day I was just like, well, what are we going to do? It's going to be around Christmas time. I know, the Monstrous Compendium. Everybody will feel Christmassy with this episode.
Right, because I think we've run out of wish books to talk about.
Yeah, totally. So the Monstrous Compendium, actually, for me, I got it a couple years after it released because in 1989, I was like 11. I'm not sure what bearing that had. But, you have to be a certain age before you get a 3-ring binder or something. Like, why did I make that distinction? A couple years later, I remember it distinctly. It was a banner Christmas for me. It was like the last big, Christmas, big deal Christmas. I remember getting a copy of the Chessex catalog that year. And I might have mentioned this in previous episodes. I'm dying to find this. I want to get a copy of this catalog because it's so stupidly important to me. And I remember on the cover, they were doing like a clearance because they still had the last 4 orange spine D&D books: Wilderness Survival Guide, Dungeoneer Survival Guide, Greyhawk Adventures, and Dragonlance Adventures. And they just had apparently had a ton of them in the warehouse, and they were selling them for, whatever adds up to like $15 with tax. I think they were $3.75 each.
Wow.
Or whatever. So I remember that cover, and I just remember getting that catalog and just handing it to my parents and being like, here, buy all of this. This is what I want. And they kind of listened. It was a really crazy amount of Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing stuff I got that year, including those 4 orange spine books. And it was also the one year, it was the year that I finally accidentally found where they hid the presents. So in the beginning of December, I stumble upon this pile of boxes that are filled with D&D stuff. And I'm just like, oh my God, Hambone, it's hundreds of monsters just waiting here between me and the cellophane.
And you had to wait 10 more days.
Fuck no, I didn't.
Well, you just opened them up right then and there?
I thought I was being slick. I was found out, but yeah, I kind of might have opened the cellophane on a couple of them and snuck a peek.
My God, I remember in the 80s and the 90s, all the horny teenagers that we were friends with, getting hot and bothered when someone snuck out one of their uncle's Playboys. That was a big deal. Yet you were 13 years old getting hot and bothered by a Chessex catalog. I feel like that's so on brand for you. And I love it. And now I'm today's day old, and I'm hearing about a Chessex catalog, and I'm like, oh man, I want to see the Chessex catalog too. What's up? What's up? That is awesome. So you snuck a peek, you got caught because your rogue skills were not great at age 13.
They were not what they are now.
My goodness gracious. So that had to be a banner Christmas for you.
It was pretty great, and the thing that sort of strikes me as funny is we were playing then, but like nobody had one of these or something. Like this was the first time I saw them was, like in my mom's closet. I was just like, oh my God, there's a binder full of monsters. Because, you back then, you just sort of played with what you had. And like Daniel's Den didn't carry this. It just had monster manuals. So that's what we played with, I guess. I have very fuzzy, patchy memories about like what we played and how we played. But I do know that Monstrous Compendium was not how we played. I will say that it is funny looking back at something like that and just being able to see like, oh, your destiny was fixed all that time ago. Like all of the trajectory of your life looking back makes perfect sense. Straight as an arrow.
Yeah. It's pretty much A to B for you, man. The Monstrous Compendium, like knowing what it is for those listening at home. I mean, we're going to tell you about it, but me as the presenter of this show, like I know what it is. And thinking about you getting it at that point had to be like, the AD&D version of the NES. Like that was big time.
Yeah. It's hard to think back to a time when I didn't have it on my shelf. It's just such like we'll get to how important it is. Let me tell you what it is. Monstrous Compendium is the equivalent of the Monster Manual for second edition. You get your player's handbook, you get your DM's guide, and then you get the Monstrous Compendium. What was really different about the compendium was that it wasn't a book. It was a gigantic 3-ring binder. People have, this is a controversial move. People have strong opinions about this. I think that it was a fantastic magical thing. Clay in the Vintage RPG Discord, he's a friend of ours, recently drew attention to the relationship between players of role-playing games and their love of office supplies. He used the word comorbidities, which
he's not wrong.
No, it's totally perfect. You saw that, like that immediately lodged in my brain, and I will never think of it in a different way. I love office supplies. I always loved, going back to school. That part sucked, but I really did like getting a new notebook and some pens. The Monstrous Compendium really marries these two feelings together. I don't know why I find hers so appealing.
Well, because it keeps your stuff organized.
Well, yeah, but like I don't feel like like I don't think that that's a very sexy thing to like be just like, I love a binder.
It's not. And at the same time, like as a person who runs games, like you need to be kind of enamored with this kind of stuff. Because listen, let me tell you what changed my DM life was like maybe like 4 or 5 years into being a dungeon master. I was shooting the breeze with a dude I had just met who was also in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons, and we're just talking about our DM setups and stuff like that. But yeah, man, mechanical pencils got like really expensive, and I got to buy all like these colored like index cards and this and that. And he looks at me like takes a drag of a cigarette. It's like, rookie. He's like, don't you live near a dollar store? And I, at that point, like I had never thought to go to the dollar store to get all the supplies I needed to run a D&D game. And lo and behold, here's your dry erase markers. Here's your mechanical pencils. Here is all the index cards you need. And they're $1 a piece. Like,
yep.
Wow. Sucker for going to Staples all these years.
I also think that there's an unspoken divide between old school and new school players that I can easily pick them out. If you have a whole lot of custom kit that's made out of wood, built specifically for playing Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games, you are new school.
Very true.
If you have a whole bunch of binders from Staples and some index cards and like repurposed stuff, you're old school.
If you have any of your DM kit bound in leather, welcome to the club, new guy. We're glad to have you. We're not throwing shade at all, but there is a very distinct line in the sand when it comes to like old dudes running D&D and new dudes running D&D. And I love it. I just love seeing everybody and what they bring to the table and their like elegant or not so elegant way of like organization. Cause it's awesome. It's so cool, you know? And nowadays for me, because everything's on Discord, I use a tablet and a stylus. So
yeah,
modern love, baby. Here we are.
Yeah, so the Monstrous Compendium is a binder. The original one it comes out in 1989. It's a launch book, primarily, maybe entirely illustrated by Jim Holloway. Jeff Easley puts up a cover that I think is as iconic as anything that was put on a second edition book cover, featuring an Umber Hulk, a Displacer Beast, and a Beholder. I really, 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 really cannot emphasize enough how much I love the look of the monsters on a white background with clean blue text. It just sparkles to me. It says new, fresh, exciting.
Oh, it pops.
Yeah. I think that later on they changed that trade dress, and like wasn't particularly in love with it for anything else, but like I really love the way the Monstrous Compendium and later the Monstrous Manual was, did that clean limbo kind of vibe, and then they switched to the black books, and I just hate it on the Monstrous Manual. It just bothers me because it looks so heavy and like not clean, not spacious. So the cool thing about a binder is that you get to expand it. Volume 2 of the Monstrous Compendium was also published in 1989. Jeff Easley cover, there's an Etten on it. It's really great. There's a couple other monsters that I don't remember off the top of my head, but the Etten really stands out. Jim Holloway does about half of the illustrations, and Daniel Horn does the other half. Daniel Horn did maybe the best Dragon magazine cover, the one where that Lady Ranger is being like ambushed by the giant skeleton warrior. Yeah, I love his paintings, but his black and whites are really kind of fantastic and sort of anticipate a more like quirky look that lays the groundwork for like a Tony Diddley later on. I literally did not realize that it was Daniel Horn until I was researching for this episode. So I'm learning things every day.
I love that.
It's so weird.
And the thing that I really appreciated about the Monstrous Compendium was that you could continue to add to it. And I'm right there with you. The pop for the clean on the cover, the idea that it keeps everything nice and organized. Like in my brain, my young DM brain, I was like, God, it's gotta be so cool because like you get to keep all your monsters in like one place. It's kind of like having like a true bestiary, as it were.
Yeah, and you can take them out. My whole thing is like, I love the utility of being able to just be like, I need this guy, this guy, this guy. Come on off the bench. And like you put them in your game binder because you have two binders. You have your binder for your Monstrous Compendium and you have the binder for like your game notes. You'll probably also have a separate binder for character sheets too. If we're getting real here, lots of binders. The downside, of course, is that it is a binder and loose leaf pages kind of get tugged and beat up. Those holes are very fragile. So that is sort of like a glad glum because you also get to have, ring savers, those little stickers that you put on the page. And it's more office supplies, and that's what we're talking about here today is how much we love office supplies. So you can put those little hole savers on there so that once they tear, you just put the sticker on there on both sides and then it ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, I'll tell you, honestly, I've tried to buy this book so many times. And, I'll be at a toy show. I'll be at like a con, I'll be somewhere. I'm like, oh, wow, that's awesome. I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, got all the monsters in there? And he's like, yeah, the monsters are in there. I go, no, you got all the monsters that came with it in there? And there's usually that awkward quiet where like they know that if they're going to sell it to you, they need to come down a few bucks because they definitely don't have the flump or something in that book. But that was like always the problem, like trying to get one because they're used, they're loved. And if you didn't put the ring savers on them, you were going to lose pages.
Yeah. And like I take pretty good care of my stuff and my Monstrous Compendium pages are full of ring savers. Like through use, it's going to happen and it's sad. And that's one of the big downsides of the binder format is that this is going to happen. It's not a book. Like a book, if you take care of it, is never going to betray you. But those holes in loose leaf paper, they will always betray you, honestly.
Every time.
So there's also a design limitation in typical TSR fashion. I don't think that they like really thought ahead too far down the line. So Monstrous Compendium 1 comes out in 1989. Same time Volume 2 comes out. Neat thing, you can marry the two products. You could just file Volume 2 into Volume 1 and it works because made sure that the alphabetization was had murdered that word. It worked. So like the backs, they slot in there and there's no confusion. The same is true of the Forgotten Realms appendix, also published in 1989. But you're starting to get to this point where like I always felt there was something weird about the Forgotten Realms one. Things were like taking up too much room or like the natural flow of the first two volumes isn't apparent in the Forgotten Realms one. I felt like they struggled. And I believe that they struggled because years later, I found out that Forgotten Realms, you could also slide that one in. But to do that, you have to kind of like, once you already have these two books together, you have to account for the alphabet. You got to make sure that what's on the back is after the front, but will also fit into what is already there. That becomes a bigger and bigger logistical problem the more compendiums that you include. And it means that there's sort of like a need for filler monsters or just filler information to make that page count. So you don't have to worry so much about the back side of that page. Volume 4 is a whole other binder. It's the Dragonlance one, which I think is a weird sort of pick for a binder. You would think that they would have done it for the Forgotten Realms one, just because of the increased focus on Forgotten Realms in second edition. Like it had already become the default. You know what it is? It was probably something tied to the popularity of the novels, even though it wasn't like the most popular campaign setting. They probably, because these were bookstores, they displayed real well in bookstore shelves. So that's probably why. But after that, no attempt made at kind of having them file into each other. After that point, they are all sort of discrete things that still go in your binder, but you kind of keep your Greyhawk ones together with your character ones, with your Spelljammer ones. I don't even think the two Spelljammer compendiums are compatible. I don't think that you can put those two together. Same with the Ravenloft ones. Like I think that they have to be kept separate. And it's just funny that they started off that way. I think that it's one of those things that really doesn't dawn on you as like a product designer until you're sort of in it and you realize, well, we're going to do 14 of these. Crap. Like, how do we alphabetize? You can't do it on the fly. If you didn't do all 14 volumes ahead of time, and you couldn't, how could you? The last one came out, I think, in like 93. You're releasing these over a course of like 4 or 5 years. Like there's no way that you could do that much work ahead of time unless you're crazy like me.
I mean, you do have all your posts for 2022 done. So
yeah, I mean,
there we go.
Like I said, unless you're crazy. It's just sort of a funny thing. I think that like there's always sort of like this idea for me where TSR is sort of succeeding in spite of itself. I don't think that's the case here. I think that it's just like, it's nice to see TSR make like a really understandable mistake. This is the sort of mistake that I would run into where like you get 3 volumes into something, you're just like, crap, I made the wrong decision in volume 1 and now I'm stuck with it, or I got to do something weird.
You can't go back to that page that you thumbed to get the different path. You're stuck with it.
Right.
So they made 14 volumes of this, all different things.
15.
Cheese 15. And crackers. At what point do they go, all right, we should just make books? This is out of hand.
In 93, I think, is when the Monstrous Manual came out, which was basically a hardcover version, same formatting. One of the things that changes here is that you get a whole lot more, information about your monsters. You get, you used to just get like 1 or 2 paragraphs in the old monster manuals. This, like, you get like combat tactics, you get an idea of, their background, where they came from, like the rumors about them, social groups, like tribal structures, ecology, like what they do when they're not, eating adventurers, all that stuff is sort of there on the page because you have a half a page of detail to fill up. The Monstrous Manual keeps all of that information, but condenses it, makes it smaller so that they can jam even more monsters into the hardcover book. That book is one of the first things that Tony Dieterlizzi worked on for D&D. And then there's like a million of those, which go back to, even though the hardcover, the relaunch of the line is the Monstrous Manual, which harkens back to first edition, the supplements to the Monstrous Manual are all called Monstrous Compendiums, even though they're square bound books. So you get 3 Planescape ones, you get 2 Ravenloft ones, a Dark Sun one. There's the Mystara one, which I really like, which sort of takes the creature catalog and brings it to D&D. And then there's 4 annuals, one for 94, 95, 96, not 97, but 98.
That's a weird flex.
Yeah, well, I mean, at late 90s, they'd been sold, Wizards of the Coast buys them. Like, there's a lot of turmoil at that point. So it makes sense that volume 4 missed a year.
It's so wild, man. It's so wild learning this stuff for me. And I know, like, for our listeners, it's exciting because they're learning just as much as I'm learning. But, man, always a twist and turn with TSR.
Another cool thing about these is you can't have a big alphabetized thing without dividers.
Ooh.
And the dividers are the best part, Hambone, because they are full color without text, reproductions of paintings of iconic Dungeons and Dragons art. I love the dividers, and each set comes with like 4 additional ones. And I think volume 2 has like 8, and there's probably like a similar number in the original binders, like 8 or 10. If you're going to really do it alphabetically with a divider for each letter of the alphabet, you definitely had to get like all of the compendium appendices and steal their dividers to get everything divided right, which I've done because I'm, again, not quite, together in the brain. But I didn't have like Trapper Keepers. I didn't like the squishiness of Trapper Keepers. I just like a regular binder, especially one that had like the vinyl pocket in the front so you could put your own cover in.
Love it.
In high school, because like I'm a gigantic nerd, high school, I used to put those in the pocket in the front. Keith Parkinson's Gods of Lankmar was in heavy rotation, as was the I think it's Clyde Caldwell's, or maybe it's Jeff Easley, The Skeleton Bursting Down the Door, and Daniel Horn's the Ranger getting attacked by the Skeleton Warrior, all heavy rotation.
Love it.
It's so good. You can see the fold mark because you had to fold the tab under to get it in the slot.
Yeah, you did.
I am sure that I am not the only person out there who did this. If you did, let me know in the comments so I don't feel so alone, okay?
Hell yeah. Stu, do you have any final thoughts on the Monstrous Compendium?
It's a really great book. It's hard for me to say, like, you should go get this. You should try and track it down because, like you said, it is hard to find them where they're in good shape and guaranteed to have all the monsters without any tears in the binder holes, without spending a whole lot of money. They are expensive. It is sort of one of those books where it's just like you are probably paying for the knowledge that it is in good shape and complete. There was a lot of attrition. So an expensive book, but if you can afford it, or if you have one, love it, because I think that it brings a utility that is unique and sort of long gone as a moment in time. You could do that now, but it would require you to print out a lot of stuff. And I don't know, like that just seems wasteful. The idea of just having like a monster on a sheet is so appealing to me. And of course, later box sets often had additional Monstrous Compendium pages in them. And it was so good. I love that. Better time, a happier time.
Here, here, buddy. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG. I'd already posted about the Monstrous Compendium, but the Monstrous Manual and the annuals are coming up in 2022.
Very cool. You can find me on the Twitter, on Instagram, and now on TikTok because I'm trying to promote stuff at John McGuire RPG. I'm not going to dance. Come on, son. I'm not going to dance. I might start doing a series where I kind of explain to you how to play action in like 60-second clips. But man, I ain't dancing for nobody. You can find me on all social media, John McGuire RPG. You could also pick up a copy of my latest adventure, Rocket to Russia, over at our friends at Exalted Funeral. If you like the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. And if you really like the show, why not become a patron? Patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at my RPG, 3-2-1 Action, and all the things we've got coming up for that. And we got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.